So before we get into having our thinking particles follow a spline, I want to point out that when I hit the play button, my cells are being emitted by this particle emitter, and they're kind of shooting out into space and they're spreading. I want to mention that if we select the TP standard emitter, there's a whole bunch of options that are available. Most of them are pretty intuitive. If you look through the attributes manager, there are things that you can do to adjust the way that the particle is emitting. There are things like the number of particles that are being generated, the spread angle, currently that's set to 45% or 45 degrees. I'm just going to reduce that a little bit, and it's pretty obvious how that works. Rather than these blood cells being scattered out into space like that, now there's a more narrow angle that they're being projected on. There are things like speed, life, and you can control these based on the rate of speed, how long that these particles exist for. And then, of course, there are things like spin. I'm going to use the spin value to get the blood cells to start to tumble in space, but I'll do that after I make an arrangement to have these blood cells follow a spline. So the next step in this is I want to come up with this idea that these blood cells are confined to a vein. And we'll model that vein, a cutaway of the vein here in just a short bit. But the vein will be based on a spline, and we could do sweep NURBs of some kind of shape to extrude along that spline and cause those blood cells to exist within that, or restricted to that space. But the way that we get these particles to follow this shape is really kind of fun and interesting. The real power of thinking particles comes when we start to dig inside the different kinds of presets. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the content browser. I'll just expand this a little bit. Now, inside the presets, there are a couple of different options. We can dig through dynamics and effectors and emitters. What I'm looking for is I'm looking for an interaction. And specifically, I am looking for TP follow spline. So I'm looking through here. There's TP follow spline. And in fact, if you kind of click on each one of these, they give you a little preview of what they do. And in addition to the presets, there are example scenes that you can look at. So if I go back out, leave presets, and go into thinking particles examples, and I look at dynamics or interactions, I can actually load an existing scene that has different kinds of scenes established. So that there are a lot of options in here. There's some really great stuff, but I'm going to back out to thinking particles, presets, and I'm looking for interactions. Specifically, I'm looking for TP follow spline, and I'll just double click. Once I double click that, I now have a TP follow spline object in my object manager, and what I want to do is I'll just flatten out my view here, and I'll focus on a nice flat right view. I'll just back out just a little bit, and I'm going to go into the splines, grab freehand, and just to experiment, I'll draw a real quick freehand spline. I'll go back to my perspective view. Now what I want to do is I want these particles to follow that spline. And if I select the TP follow spline, and I look and see that there's a spline object here, I can drag the spline that I've created into the spline object for the follow spline, and that's it. Inherent in the TP follow spline and the TP standard emitter being part of the same scene, unless you apply some kind of restriction to it, those particles will automatically start to follow that spline. So that's all there is to it. By having a standard emitter and introducing different kinds of interaction types within the scene, we can very quickly set up that scenario. Now, if I go into TP follow spline, there are a couple of things that we want to start to tune into. There's a trigger distance. There's 300 centimeters. And the way that we could make something, we could influence this, is that as soon as we get within 300 centimeters of the spline, those particles will then become attracted to it. So if I were to experiment and just take this standard emitter, and I'll kind of move this way over, I'm guessing that's at least 300 meters based on the scale away, and I'll just rotate this emitter just a little bit to point those back towards that spline. Rewind and hit the playhead. So those particles kind of go off into space until they get within 300 meters. Now you can see that some of them are kind of going underneath. They're not quite clearing that threshold of 300 meters, but those that get within 300 meters are getting pulled along that spline. Okay, so I'll just pause that and undo. There we go. So there are a lot of options within here that will allow us to, really build a complex scenario very quickly. So follow along, try to set up a similar scenario. We'll continue to add variation to this and start to think about the scene and the staging of it and some of the other assets that need to be here. But we'll do that. We'll push that forward in the next presentation.